Well, hello there, and welcome to the Nordic Football Podcast, Allsvenskan 10 Players to Watch 2023. You're with me, Steve Wyss, and of course, the main man for this show, Jonathan Fadugba. How are you doing, Jonathan? Are you ready for your famous 10 to Watch?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Yes, I am ready. Always love this section of the show. A little bit late this year in terms of into the season, but as we mentioned on the Eliteserien 10 to Watch, it's probably maybe good in a way because we've had a little bit of time to refine our list, maybe change one or two who aren't getting in the team in the early parts of the year. My list has definitely changed from the start of the season, that's for sure, because of certain team selections. So, yeah, 10 to Watch, a show that is always well enjoyed by people. I think they always like this, and we've always said that we have a lot of scouts who follow us on the Nordic Football Podcast on Twitter and things like that, and they always seem to be very keen on this section. So players who could break through and names maybe that you'll be familiar with that will burst into the scene in the coming years. I mean, Steve, we're recording this on the night that Alexander Isak has just pulled out one of the best assists you'll ever see, and I remember talking about him when he was at OIK, which was about 6-7 years ago now. So there's always gems to be had in Sweden and Norway, and that's why you're here watching this episode. So hopefully we'll bring you 10 more for the year to come.
Can't remember if Alexander Isak was ever on a 10 to Watch list.
It was long gone by the time we started this podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
But I've talked about him on the podcast, like the official podcast.
Yes, indeed. Now normally your list is like something from a kindergarten, isn't it? In terms of ages. I can reveal that this is the oldest average age of 10 to Watch that Jonathan Fadugba has ever given out. All right, maybe we not know for sure, but I'm pretty certain that it is in terms of metrics there. We'll get started. That's what everyone's tuning in for. And thank you very much. You're watching this on Patreon right now. We appreciate all your support and hope you enjoy the two 10 to Watch videos this year in Norway and Sweden. Take it away, Jonathan. Who is the first man on your list? Actually, I need to do it because we've not shared the order, have we? So he needs to come up on screen, and there he is.
Yeah, you'll tell me.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, just from last year, just to recap, you mentioned that I tend to go for the younger players, which is definitely true. Last year, I had only 4 players who were over the age of 20. We had a 17-year-old. We got Ondrejka, who's now been signed by Royal Antwerp. Where we had Williams Wedborg, who got a lucrative £5 million move to Celta Vigo. So you can kind of get a sense of the talent that we go for. Mustafa Zaidan was another one who did well. He was at Sirius at the start of our season, and he got a big move to Malmo. So yeah, we had a decent success rate. I think there's quite a few on my list from last year that will still, I think, be relevant in years to come. Maybe one or two of them a little bit early. And I think that's the aim for this year. I'm looking to have a little bit of a higher average age and maybe some players who are actually in the team rather than ones that may be on the fringes of the team. So I've tried to get a mix. But the first one on your list, as you can see there, is the Malmo FF youngster. Everybody's talking about him. His name is, of course, Hugo Larsson at Malmo.
Yeah, 18-year-old central midfielder from Malmo. I actually have him in my current fantasy team in Allsvenskan, along with every other Larsson in the league, Jonathan. But I remember you talking about this guy on the podcast before the first game of the season, and I thought, you know what, let's add him and let's have a look at him. And every time I've watched their games, he has caught my eye for such a young player. Tell us a little bit more about his profile in terms of exactly what type of midfielder he is.
Yeah, it's a weird one because he kind of in a way reminds me of like a young Kevin De Bruyne. And I know it's partly because of his looks, maybe the sort of shock of reddish hair, and maybe that's part of it, but also a little bit in his passing style and choice of passes. He's not as dynamic as De Bruyne in terms of the runs he makes. So I think that's an area of his game that we'll see if he develops in the years to come. He's not someone who sort of runs in behind. If you look at, for example, De Bruyne against Arsenal, Man City beat them 4-1, and the runs De Bruyne makes off Haaland and that kind of forward running and that ability to just pull out unbelievable finishes and passes. But his choice of passing, I think, is very good, actually. He's a deep line playmaker for Malmo in the way he plays. He sits in front of the defence in Henrik Rydström's sort of possession-based system. And he obviously broke into the team last season, Milos Milojevic, the manager who was eventually sacked last season. Malmo had a terrible year, but maybe one of the good things for them, apart from obviously winning the cup, was the breakthrough of Hugo Larsson. Maybe that's one of the only things they'll look back on that from that season and say that was worth all the pain, because he gave him his debut. Milojevic, he called him up from the under-19 team during pre-season, and he's since gone on to play 50-plus games now for Malmo. He's been given 2 contracts during that time. That's how good he is. He signed 1 contract, then he signed another contract. Had a massive £12 million bid from Bournemouth in January to take him to the Premier League, but he turned it down. And he said that he doesn't want to leave at the moment. He wants to give Malmo more time. And I think that's a sign of maturity as well. He didn't just take the money and run. I don't think he would have been anywhere near Bournemouth's first 11, to be honest, at this moment in time. So I think it's good and a wise decision for him to stay in Sweden a little while longer, especially when he's a key man. So for someone in your fantasy team, he's someone who plays intricate passes, forward passes. He's also quite good covering ground. In terms of awareness of space and what pockets of space to drop into, where to make a pass. In terms of sort of numbers, this is from our partners Wyscout. He averaged 44.75 passes per 90 minutes last season, with an 87% passing accuracy, 6.82 duels, defensive duels, with a 67% win rate as well. So he can win the ball. He's not someone who's shy at getting putting a foot in, and 7.38 recoveries per 90 as well. So someone who can make interceptions and sort of break down attacks and start attacks. One thing I liked about him, Steve, as well, just to wrap up, is he's a confident player. He mentioned in an interview after the Bournemouth bid broke down that he, Zlatan Ibrahimovic's Allsvenskan transfer record, the biggest ever transfer out of Allsvenskan, and there was talk that he would potentially break that transfer record with the Bournemouth offer, and a few other teams have been interested in him. It's not just Bournemouth, but they're the ones who put the money in. And Larsson came out and said that he joked that he would like to break the record. And he said, time will tell, but he plans to break the record. So, I like players like that who have a little bit of confidence about them. He's not shy to sort of say, yeah, why not? Why not go down in history as the all-time biggest transfer out of Sweden? So that's the sort of profile of that player. And yeah, I like what I see of Larsson, and I think he has got a really exciting future.
Obviously worth mentioning, he is from their own academy. I do believe he's one of their own. And I mean, I've noticed he started all 4 games, lasted 90 minutes in 3 out of 4. Is that normal for someone at Malmo coming through? I mean, they're a big club. For the manager to trust him this early in his, at this age, when there's a lot of pressure on them to get results and win a title back, that just shows you how mature he must be right now.
Yeah, well, he's young in life years, but he's probably quite mature already in football years. He's had 4 managers now in a year. So, he's already used to playing different styles. He's broken into the Swedish national team camp as well. He was called up for a training camp, I think. And, he's already, most of those 4 managers have picked him. So that pretty much sums it up. Arga Herida, I think, dropped him for a little period of time. But apart from that, really, he's been relied upon. And when you're 17, 18 years old, that's a magnificent testament to his maturity. You're not going to play for Malmo if you haven't got something about you. If there's one thing about Malmo, is they've got that little bit of arrogance where you've got to be confident on the ball, you've got to be able to take possession and get it forward in different areas. There's no shrinking violence at Malmo. You won't survive long if you're a sort of shrinking teenager. So that's a real testament, I think, to his ability. Rydström, as we mentioned, likes his possession game. Malmo have won every game this season so far, as we record this, in the first month of the season, and he's been an essential part of it. Playing alongside Christiansen, playing alongside Sergio Pena, and the midfield looks quite good. Rydström won't select you if you're not able to keep the ball in that midfield, and he is able to keep the ball. So, yeah, Malmo Academy graduate. They've got a few others. Sebastian Nanasi as well as in the team. He was in my 10 to watch last season. And Malmo's academy is decent. There's been players that have come through from that and gone on. I think Armand Hodzic was from the academy. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure he was a Malmo Academy graduate. He'll now be playing in the Premier League next season, obviously with Sheffield United. So they do produce players, and Larsson is the latest.
Yes, that is Hugo Larsson from Malmo there. We're going to move on to another midfielder now, a much older one. Joint oldest player on the list, Carl Gustafsson from Kalmar. I'm actually going to have a look at the actual dates of births here. he might well be the oldest player on the list. But I mean, for you, a 23-year-old is getting into geriatric terms for a 10 to watch list, Jonathan. So he must have really caught your eye, and you're keeping close tabs on him.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, you know, because of the recording date, because we're recording slightly into the season, there's been about 4 or 5 players. There's been 4 players I've cut from my list who haven't featured at all this season yet. So I think Gustafsson is someone that, you know, is another midfielder. So it's similar in terms of some of the traits that Larsson possesses, but he's much older, obviously 5 years older, much more mature. And I think he's someone he's caught my eye a lot actually at Kalmar, sorry, and I feel that he deserves a bit of credit. I think he will get a move. I'm not sure how long he'll be in Allsvenskan now. I think he's coming to that point where he's maybe getting too good for the league. And, you know, again, it's similar to Larsson, I suppose, in terms of midfielders. I don't know how many midfielders I've selected. Hopefully it's not all just talking about deep line playmakers, but he's another deep line sort of playmaker. He can play as a defensive midfield player or as a centre mid, you know, breaking the lines of passes. Again, Rydström, you know, it's probably quite similar to Larsson, to be honest. Rydström was the manager of Kalmar last year, and they're doing similar jobs to Larsson and Gustafsson. Gustafsson's job at Kalmar is to retain possession, pick passes, distribute play, and he does that fairly well. He does have, I think, a little bit of an eye for an assist as well, and he's a player that I just feel deserves credit for what he's done over the years at Kalmar. He, you know, came from their academy. He was an ever-present last season, played all 30 games, 1 goal, 1 assist as a defensive midfield player. And he did so well that he was called up to the Swedish national team training camp. And his contract ends at the end of this season. He's mentioned that he would like to move abroad. He wouldn't leave Kalmar for another Swedish team. He's kind of hinted at. And I think with the national team interest and just the fact that he's breaking in and around the fringes of the Swedish national team, he will probably get more interest and potentially get a move abroad. So, yeah, you know, I like my midfielders. You like your goalkeepers. And he's someone that I just feel that the age he's at, the level he's at, he deserves a little bit of credit. And I think there could be a move on the cards for him this season.
Yeah, this is the sort of player. I'm looking at his stats now. And 87 Allsvenskan appearances in his career, 1 goal, 3 assists. And, you know, it doesn't look like... This is why you have to look much further than statistics for this type of player in this position. And I've always found them really difficult to judge and work out. For you, it's almost like a speciality position. Jonathan, is there... Just wondering, I mean, he's on the list, obviously, because he's one to watch. What do you think is it about this particular season, perhaps, that makes him perhaps have a real breakout campaign? Is it because you think maybe he's in that shop window looking for a way out, get a good club at the end of the year?
Yeah, he's definitely in the shop window. I think if we look back on this one in a year's time, I'd be amazed if he's still in Sweden or if he's still at Kalmar with that expiring contract and the service he's given to Kalmar. He's been a real servant for them. You know, obviously the new manager's come in at Kalmar and he's done really well. They've been good so far this season. Kalmar, you know, they're still up at the top end of the table, and Gustafsson's played an important part in that. You know, the new manager Henrik Jensen, former Midtjylland coach, he's someone who likes possession, high press, and he's relied on Gustafsson in his team. And I think he will be, if not ever present again, he will certainly play most of the games, I think. And you know, once you've played sort of 3 full seasons as a kind of like most really dependable player, you might start to get a little bit of interest at this period of time. And I think he's someone that I don't think his ceiling is, I'm not sure if he'd ever end up, say, the Premier League, but I think his ceiling could be somewhere like maybe, you know, I could see him in
Belgium.
Sort of, yeah, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands. I think that'll be his next step for him, potentially. Maybe a big club in Denmark, Poland, somewhere like that. I think that's kind of what his trajectory will be, in my opinion. Not sure how far he goes. I'd like to think that he could maybe step up into maybe Germany, Bundesliga, something like that. But there's room for progression, and I think he is of the level now where he's almost too good for the league in terms of his ability and potential. So from that point of view, yeah, I think he's an exciting player. I like watching that kind of player as well. Someone who's got good awareness of midfield and can pick a pass, you know, and is calm on the ball as well. I like that sort of player, and Carl Gustafsson definitely offers that for Kalmar. So that's why he's on my list.
Brilliant. So that's we're going to move on now to what I'd call is a more traditional Jonathan Fadugba player on the 10 to watch list. In fact, 3 of the next 4 certainly would fit that bill. This fella here is from B-Corps Häcken, Momdou Sonko, or his full name, I do believe, is Momdou Lamine Sonko, an 18-year-old forward. And I've noticed just a man with only 12 Allsvenskan minutes to his name. So this is the sort of raw talent which we come to expect from your pedigree of talents down the years, Jonathan. And already I'm getting excited because I've got a feeling this player could be something very interesting.
Yeah, you're definitely right there. This is more up my street in terms of maybe traditional choices. Often players who haven't broken through, and he's not played, I don't think, at all this season, or very, very little minutes anyway, which has surprised me because Häcken have had injury problems. One of the other players on my 10 to watch, which we'll talk about in a minute, has been injured. And I thought Sonko might get more game time. They've actually gone for Pontus Darbo, who's a young player who maybe, tune in 2024 maybe, and we'll see if he's on my list. Darbo, he seems to be selected ahead of him, of Sonko, which I wasn't necessarily expecting based on the preseason, because Sonko was electric in preseason, and I think he's a player who's got a very bright future ahead of him, no matter if he isn't in the team now. I think I'd like to think by the end of this season he'll start to maybe make a breakthrough, or next year. He's one of the biggest talents, in my opinion, in Sweden. He's got 3 goals, 2 assists in 4 games during the 2023 Swedish Cup. So he did get a lot of game time, as I mentioned, in the preseason. He had trials at Liverpool as a 12-year-old, and he compared himself to Neymar and says, I very much believe, well, his coach, sorry, he was a formerly of Västra Frölunda, which is a local team. And that's before he got his move to BK Häcken in 2020. And his former coach at Frölunda said, I very much believe that one day he will reach one of the very biggest clubs in Europe. Now, he's already had tons of clubs watching him, Sonko. 8 clubs apparently went to watch him in the Swedish Cup, scouting him. BK Häcken have already put a price on his head. They said 5 million euros is what they want for him. There was already talking preseason of maybe breaking their record and them wanting a record price, and that kind of really sums it up. He's a winger who can play wide right or wide left. As I mentioned, Neymar is someone that he's been compared to. Not maybe as good, of course. Neymar is one of the best players of the last 25 years, definitely, but in that kind of style of dribbling and also able to finish, if you know what I mean, able to beat a man not only with pace but also with kind of a bit of skill. And I think that sums up Sonko a little bit in terms of profile. So he's one that, with Häcken, Steve, I'm almost running out of talents for them, because I picked Benny Traore a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. I think he was on my 10 to watch before he broke through. I picked Aman Romeo last season, who is breaking through now. So I think I'm always a year ahead of the curve with Häcken players on my 10 to watch list. So it's almost tune in next year maybe to get the hype. But yeah, from what I've seen of him so far and from the general hype, he is going to be one of my 10 to watch, because if he does break through, I think he will be highly coveted.
Yeah, obviously he caught the eye massively, didn't he, in the Swedish Cup with some great stats there. And it sounds like it might be one of these players that we don't see much of him in Sweden before he's moved on. It has happened before, hasn't it, where someone makes, less than a dozen appearances in the league and they're snapped up by, because they're that good of a talent. He sounds, we've had some interesting comparisons on this 10 to watch list so far. I think I had a player just sort of compared to Messi. You're comparing someone to Neymar now. There's the talent's there if you know where to look, isn't it, Jonathan? And Sonko. Is this a sort of player?
I'm not. Yeah. Go on. Do you have a question? No?
I was just going to say, this sounds like the ceiling for this player is perhaps pretty on the high side potentially if things work out for him.
Yeah, I'm not personally comparing him to Neymar, but that's what people have compared him to in some of the quotes and how he models his game. He said that that's an idol of his. So that's kind of, sometimes when a player mentions a player that they look up to, that's what they model their game on. And you can see some similarities in what he tries to do on the ball. And he's, the real speed he has as well. Ceiling wise, I think it's almost quite hard to say, because I would like to see more of him in Allsvenskan, to be honest. I've got actually a little feeling, Steve, that they might be holding him back just because they don't want him to get a move. That's something I'm wondering, if you know what I mean, because they've had an injury to one of their key players. They've brought Tontestava, who's another, like I say, 17-year-old. Maybe next year tune in, he might be on my list. They've got Oscar Dennis, who's 20 years old. They've got a lot of sort of talents in that forward areas, Bekwahaken, that they can play. So they do have a rich number of options. You know, I always seem to have at least one forward from Hacken in my tend to watch. You know, I'm thinking back to Leo Bengtsson, for example, who was on my list and is in Cyprus now. Pulled out an unbelievable bicycle kick. But Sonko's one where I feel that once he gets game time, he can really have a quick breakthrough. And it might be like a Swedberg from last season where he literally plays 6 months and he's gone. That's how I feel about him. And that's how he's talked about within Swedish circles, you know, in Gothenburg and things like that. There's a real buzz about him as a player. So don't know if it's maybe just the manager wanting to keep him, just restrain him a little bit. He's still very young. I don't know if it's maybe niggly injuries. I don't know if it's just maybe he prefers other options. But there's certainly a lot of hype around Sonko. And I think once he breaks into the team, you know, without a number of scouts already watching him in cup games, Steve, that aren't really that high level sometimes, some of the matches, it already gives you a hint that, you know, he's highly coveted. So definitely want to watch this space. And I think a lot of people, you know, this happens quite a lot, Steve, to be honest, in Sweden, where we talk about a player and then I feel like a year later that everyone will start putting the hype machine on them. So remember where you heard it here first. Momdou Sonko, if he does go on.
Yeah, you heard it here first. It really does feel like one of those, doesn't it? I must say. Remember the name, Momdou Sonko. We're going to move to Stockholm now for your next selection. Jonathan, I'll let you introduce him and take him away.
Yeah, another one who's been scouted by top clubs. Lucas Bergvall. Now, he's a player that again, won't get many minutes. I think you've, in terms of the order of the list, we sort of gone for 2 centre midfielders who are established, and now it's 2 maybe players you might not see a huge amount of. But Bergvall, if he doesn't get game time this season, it'll be maybe because you're going to have a really strong squad. And I think that, you know, getting minutes for them is difficult, even for the established players like Oliver Berg, Edvardsson. You know, they have a lot of options, Djurgården. So I feel like maybe this year it might be a year too early, but Steve, he might not be hitting Sweden in a year's time, so you can't really wait too long. Lucas Bergvall, he's a young player who's signed for DIF, a big club in Stockholm, of course. He was at Bromma Poikina, and they've also signed his brother Theo Bergvall as well, who's a right back. They come from a family of Djurgården players. I think his mother played for Djurgården's women's team. And Bergvall is he does actually remind me a lot of William Swedberg, who I just talked about, who's at Celta Vigo now. Very tight in his movements, good close control, receives the ball well. He's got the same shock of sort of that blonde hair. And when he gets the ball, he can go on his left or right foot. And he's very intricate in his sort of, you know, 1 and 2 touch passing, plays triangles, can sort of get himself between the lines and between players and sort of pick up the ball in little pockets. He had trials at Manchester United already. And as someone who's born in 2006, making you feel old, maybe remember the World Cup in Germany, maybe. Then he was only just born around that sort of time. But yeah, Lucas Bergvall.
2006 World Cup, that was a really good World Cup, you know. It really was. It was one of the best ones I can remember. Just everything about it, you know, good memories, really. So anyway, on that, going off on a tangent there, Bergvall, there seem to be more Bergvalls than rabbits in Stockholm, and Djurgården are certainly picking them up, aren't they? They've signed nearly €1 million was the transfer fee, according to Transfermarkt. So yeah, I mean, obviously a young 17-year-old. I think he might be the youngest player on your list this year. But yeah, he is. He's the youngest man on this list. So, you know, sky's the limit, perhaps. They wouldn't want to be, you know, selling him on so soon, though, would they? I mean, these things happen. Look at, say, you know, Kasper Tengstedt at Rosenborg. But yeah, they want at least a year or 2 out of him, unless, like, ridiculous money came in, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, this is one of the things that's been talked about around Bergvall and some of Djurgården signings, actually, that maybe did they actually just sign from Bromma Poikina to sell on, because you can flip them. It's almost like right. I don't know. It's almost like, you know, stocks and shares or whatever. You know, I'm trying to think of an equivalent.
Does this value go up overnight just by signing for DIF? sort of thing.
Not necessarily, but he's that good. He's that highly rated that it's a quick flip. If the big clubs aren't willing to take him from Bromma Poikin and then just sign him yourself and sell him for 10 times the price, maybe in a year's time, or 5 times the price. Will he get in the team? I don't know. The most recent game they played, Djurgården, they had scouts from Feyenoord and Manchester United. Now, of course, sometimes, there's a lot of media reports saying that Manchester United were there to watch Lucas Bergvall, but to be honest, at the top clubs, they've got scouts at most of these games. It's not necessarily they've gone to watch one player. Maybe it's just to keep an eye on someone. It's not to sort of jump to a conclusion and say Lucas Bergvall's going to go to United or anything like that, because you only play 1 minute in that game anyway. And these top clubs, they'll have a presence at these big games. It's just the way it is. But you can't ignore the fact that he's had a trial at Man United already, and they're still there keeping tabs on him potentially. But there is a feeling basically that Bergvall will get a big move maybe in a year or so's time, and Jurgen have just positioned himself to be able to make that profit. That's a lot of what the talk is, and the fact signing his brother as well. Maybe there's a sense that maybe they just did everything they could to get this player, because they know that even if he doesn't have a place in their squad, if he plays a couple of games, looks good, all right, we'll flip him on and sell him. Which, I mean, it's a bit of a cynical way to look at it, but that's maybe the reality at times of the transfer market, really. Sometimes the top clubs don't want to take a risk on a player until they do it at maybe a bigger club and show a bit more prominence. He was very good in Super Etten. He was quite a played a number of games for Bromma Poikin. I'm sure you'll have the particular numbers, but he's already sort of come through and played a good number of minutes in senior football, Super Etten level, which is a good level. So the challenge for him in the next year or so is, can he get into that Jurgen team and really show his ability? Obviously, training with better players and bigger names. And then obviously the background of it is, the backdrop to this, Steve, is that there's a lot of people watching him. And as I said, in terms of his ability on the ball and his intricate style, it doesn't surprise me that you've got teams like Feyenoord maybe sniffing around already.
Yeah, 441 minutes last season in the Super Etten, including 1 goal and 1 assist. When we use the positional term here, roughly centre mid, is he more sort of an attacking centre mid or more defensive sort of midfielder?
Yeah, just to briefly wrap up with him, I think he can play. I don't think he's actually defined his position yet. I think in the future he can play more attacking. I think he could even play as a wide player, inside forward type position. I think the key thing about him is the technique and the ability in tight spaces. What's he maybe like? Short bursts of speed and acceleration. That's maybe the challenge if he was going to be played more wide or more forward. But in the sort of deeper roles that he's played at times, he can get box to box, or he can kind of hold and sort of string play together. So he's almost that young, Steve. I don't think he really has a natural position yet for where he might play in the future. I think he can be molded and coached, but the raw materials are there for him to maybe play either as an attacking or as a sort of, maybe not box to box, but just as that sort of solid 8. I don't see him maybe as a defensive midfielder, but you never know, because you do have some defensive midfielders who are kind of good on the ball and can break lines. So it really depends on the manager and what they want to do with him. I think there's a lot of room for development there. He's almost like a Play-Doh, and you can kind of mold him into how you want, if that makes sense, as a player. I think he's really multifunctional. But the key thing, Steve, is that technical ability on the ball that can really maybe give him positional versatility that excites so many people at the moment.
Yeah, if you're good on the ball, you're going to go a long way in the game, aren't you, really? Got the great foundations anyway. So number 5 on the list, we are going to Gothenburg. Johan Bangsbo. I know it's someone you've talked about on this podcast several times in the last year or two. Now he does make the official 10 to watch list. I know he's seen as kind of the big talent at EF Core right now.
Yeah, I think he probably is the biggest talent at the moment in terms of potential at EF Core. They have a fantastic academy, and there's a lot of players through the years that have gone on. We had Hussein Karnil on the list last year. So if you go back and you can watch that video now, it's free on YouTube, or if you're a Patreon subscriber, you'll have seen it already. But Karnil broke through, didn't he, eventually, and got into that team, and it's becoming more and more important, even though he's still a young player, younger than Bangsbo. Johan Bangsbo is a centre-back who has a good profile. He can play as a left-sided centre-back. I think he's been playing as a left-sided centre-back this season. But I believe he's right-footed naturally. He's a tall player. He's got a good frame, and is another player who has had a lot of interest. If you Google his name, you pretty much see him linked to Liverpool immediately. There's a lot of links there. And again, as I say, I'm a bit wary sometimes of these links because it can literally be clickbait. Sort of journalists just see a scout at the game and think that automatically they just come to conclusions. So I sometimes am a bit wary of that kind of hype. But the fact is that there's a lot of teams, Bayern Leverkusen, I think, sent scouts to watch him. I know of clubs in England that have looked at him already, just sort of from being around the game. So there's definitely a level of kind of awareness of him, of Bangsbo. And he's had a decent sort of start to his EFC Göteborg career. He's proven that he can at least put a run of games together in a solid defence. He's kept clean sheets last season, as a reliable sort of centre-back. And it's not an easy position to play when you're breaking through. I think it's one of the harder positions because mistakes you make are a bit more amplified, aren't they, Steve, than maybe if you're a forward or a wide player. The margin for error is smaller as a centre-back, I think, in a top club. So, it's not a great time for EFC by any stretch of the imagination. The biggest issue so far this season has been scoring goals, though, not keeping them out. So Bangsbo is definitely one where, as the year goes on, if he's still playing at that high level, it wouldn't surprise me if he gets a move.
Yeah, 19 appearances in the Allsvenskan last season, 2022, as a 19-year-old. I'm going to ask you a question now, and I always hate being asked this question, but I think you will answer it better than I generally do. Compare him to a well-known centre-back. What type of centre-back does he compare to that is, known and out there in the world?
It's a really tough one. I think it's hard to compare because I don't know the actual level, but I would say it's a tough one. I mean, you're going to probably be able to tell me passing stats and things like that. I don't have them to hand, but I think he's more of I would say that if you were sort of saying one name, I would say Hassami Hupia is someone who reminds me. That might just be
an
physical.
Interesting one.
That might just be physical profile, if you know what I mean. And
I was going to say it would be more physical, sort of technical balance. But Sami Hyypiä, that's an interesting sort of. He's a lanky defender, wasn't he, in his day?
Yeah, sort of like a lanky, maybe not the quickest, but kind of solid player.
Yeah.
I think there's, again, at 20 years old, there's a lot to develop. I think he can improve his passing from the back, for example. Actually, a player I've never had on this list is Robin Teehee, who I think is a fantastic player. And I feel like Teehee's better bringing the ball out from the back and passing it through the lines than Bangsbo at this moment in time, the AOK centre-back. But I think Bangsbo can improve that part of his game, and I think that's an area he'll look to do. Sometimes, Steve, it's about the manager you're working for and the tactics they want to play.
Of course it is.
Mika Stara obviously is not necessarily the most sort of he's not someone who necessarily wants the ball with his centre-backs and sort of playing those passing through the lines. So maybe he hasn't had to do that. And at the moment, EFC don't have a manager, so we don't know the template they really want to play. But Bangsbo, he's certainly not terrible on the ball. Usually he will just give it a simple pass. And he's not kind of like, I would say, like a Vidic, where he's a bit of a monster and kind of flies into challenges either. He's not someone who's rash, I don't think. He's quite cool and calm. And EFC have had other talents at centre-back through the years who have gone on and made them decent money. Immediately, I think of Jesper Tolensen, who went to Lommel for 1.8 million in 2022, and he was only 20 at the time, or 19 at the time when he got his move. So that they've had already, Carl Starfelt as well, who's at Celtic now. He's another one who he didn't come through EFC, but he played for EFC for several years before getting a move. So they have had players that they've sold on in that position. So they do sort of know how to develop that kind of talent. I think, I guess the short answer, Steve, is watch this space. I feel he will eventually be more of a natural ball-playing player. I think he needs to toughen up a little bit physically. I think there's a lot of things to work with here, Steve. That's what I'm saying. He could go either way depending on how you want to coach him. But again, it's one of those cases where the raw materials are there. He's getting a solid number of minutes in at Allsvenskan. He's doing a decent job against some tough forwards. And I've seen just enough of him to think, he could certainly move on and progress.
Definitely one to keep an eye on. Maybe at a crossroads. I feel like maybe his next coaching setup that he's with could be really, really important for Johan Bangsbo. But we must move on. I could talk for hours about EF core players, but we must move on. And we're going back to Stockholm here. An 18-year-old wide forward, Montader Madjed. Have I pronounced that right or not, Jonathan?
Yeah, you have Montader Madjed. He is very exciting and talented. Maybe the most exciting player on this list, to be honest, this year, if he can fulfill his potential. He's been talked about for years, even as a 15-year-old when he went to Varberg Boys. And I really like this player. I think there's a huge amount of talent there. He was signed from Osters originally. He was meant to be, according to Persson, the Varberg Boys manager, he was a technically extremely good left-footed 1v1 player, and that sort of almost sums him up perfectly, really. He didn't get a huge amount of game time. Obviously, he was a 15-year-old, and he was in and out of the team, and eventually made his way into the side. But it wasn't long before big clubs came calling, and in August 2022, he was signed by Hammarby, and he was loaned to their youth team, Hammarby TFF, the sort of third tier side they have, where they tend to sort of farm out a lot of talent, basically the talent farm. He got 4 goals, 3 assists for Hammarby in 4 games in the Swedish Cup. Pretty sure he scored a hat-trick against Gustafsson. I have to double check with that, but he looked really good in the cup games. And he's a Swedish under-19 international, hugely highly rated. Style of play, Steve. You mentioned a player who's a bit like Messi in your tend to watch. Madjed he's definitely got that Messi vibes. And it's not, when I sort of say that, it's not, oh, he's as good as Messi, because no one's ever going to be as good as Messi. But most people know who like football what you mean when you say a bit like Messi, in terms of that low center of gravity, left-footed, loves to dribble, can cut inside, obviously from a wide area. Can go outside as well if needs be. Maybe right foot needs a bit of improving, but just loves to dribble. Someone who can take players on 1v1 and can go past them. Marty Cifuentes has said he's a street footballer, and I love a street footballer, someone who is a bit rugged. And if he can fulfill his potential, Steve, he's going to be really, really good. So Hammarby bought a lot of young talents. I actually had two other Hammarby players that I cut from the list for this 10 to watch. So, and I could have had 2 others. So that sums up how much young talent they've been buying recently. But Madjed, I think, has the potential to be arguably the best of the lot.
We could have a 10 to watch episode just on Hammarby alone, by the sounds of it.
Really good.
Give us a comment and give us a like if you want it for exclusive Patreon content at some point this season. We do love, the thing is, these comparisons, we love this sort of thing. David Datro Fofana was described as the Ivorian Mbappe. We've had Messi comparisons. We've had Neymar comparisons. I love this sort of thing. I like sensationalizing things up, Jonathan, because when it comes right, it looks fantastic, doesn't it? So, I knew as soon as I put this name of this guy on screen, there was a glint in your eye. There was. I could see the excitement that this is the player on this list this season that you're like, yeah, you've got really high hopes for. We all have it every time. We don't always admit it, but secretly, I reckon this is the guy that you think can go a long way to the top. And I was looking at some of his stats. Yes, he did score a hat-trick against GIF Sundsvall in an 8-0 win. He's getting minutes in Allsvenskan at the moment. It feels like, do you think this is do you think by the middle of the season he might have broken through fully into a regular starter?
I'd like to think so. I mean, Cifuentes has got a wealth of options. Like you said, we could even do just a Hammarby special one day because they've got so many talents. They've been playing Jukanovic, who is someone I could easily have put on this list. He's another young player. I think he's 19, maybe 20, but he started the season quite well as well. He's got 2 goals and looked quite good. They've got Yusuf Arabi as well. They've been playing. They've got Saidi. So they've got a lot of options up front, Hammarby. But Madjed is starting to get through into the team, and I think he will eventually break through. I'll be amazed if he doesn't break through into Hammarby's side. He's good enough. I mean, anyone who wants to get a flavour of him, if you just Google the Sundsvall game, and if you're able to get the hat trick, some of the goals he scores in that game are just phenomenal. You'll really be excited, and it is a Messi kind of vibe from some of the dribbling and the finishing, the close control he has. Rooney Bargi is someone, obviously he'll never make our 10 to watch because he's already left Sweden, but he's a name a lot of people, if you like Football Manager, for example, you might be familiar with the name Rooney Bargi. He's over in Denmark, former Malmo academy. And he's been compared, they've been sort of compared to each other, who's better, basically, which is the better young Swedish talent. Madjed obviously is Iraqi heritage, but is, eligible to play for Sweden, and I believe born in Sweden and is a Sweden youth international. In terms of, what will he get in the team? I think he will. He's already played quite a few minutes, actually, Steve. I think he's already broken in pretty much.
In fairness, he started against IE so I mean...
Yeah, exactly. So he, I think he's still finding his feet. He will take time before he becomes a regular, but it wouldn't surprise me if he becomes a regular quite quickly. The worry is with all the players on this list, how long would they maybe stay at Hammarby? He's already had sort of 2 moves now, started at Osters and, moved to Varberg, and now Varberg to Hammarby. Nahir Basara, who is obviously Hammarby's main man and at times captain, I believe, he has said he will not spend long in Sweden with his style of play and finishing ability. He is one of the greatest talents I have ever seen. So wow. That much
is a fantastic way to finish for Montader Madjed. Brilliant potential here, and well worth keeping an eye on this fantastic youngster from Hammarby. We're going to move to Häcken. Second Häcken player on the list for you here, Ibrahim Sadiq, who, many did talk about him last season, but you think he can go and even raise the level even more for 2023. Ibrahim Sadiq. And I know you've always really liked this guy right from moment one.
Yeah, this will be his last season in Sweden. I'm almost certain of that, barring injury, which he is actually injured at the moment, to the detriment of my fantasy team, because he was in my team, and unfortunately, he lost his place because of a bad injury. I think he's out for about a month or so. Did score in the opening day of the season against Elfsborg, and like I said, he won't. I think I said it on the preseason podcast as well. If you go on YouTube or Spotify, he won't be in Sweden much longer, in my opinion. He already nearly left. If you believe the reports out of France, L'Équipe, who are very obviously respected, claimed that he had a move to Saint-Etienne, signed, €2 million, sealed and delivered. He was at the training ground, and then apparently last-minute talks fell apart. So he returned to Sweden. There's also been a lot of reports about moves to MLS. This is a player who was at Nordsjælland, came through from the Right to Dream Academy. They have that Ghanaian link there, and Nordsjælland are really good with young players in general, aren't they, with young talents. He made 63 appearances for them, 6 goals, 4 assists before he moved to Sweden. Last season for Häcken, 7 goals, 4 assists. And he had an important impact. He scored some key goals in that first ever league title win for Häcken. If you look at his underlying numbers last season, he kind of, I think, 0.57 non-penalty goals per 90, 6.04 dribbles per 90, 60% success rate, 0.9 key passes per 90. So he's someone who he can dribble, he can pass, he can score, and he's a real sort of final third menace, basically. Someone who just causes a nuisance, gets in people's faces. He's hard to play against. He's rough and rugged. He's someone that, especially in Sweden, he's really energetic and a real Häcken player. I think they've got a prototype of their forwards these days, Häcken, and he really fits that vision. He can play on the counter attack if they those fast counters that Häcken are good at. He really suits that sort of style of play. So yeah, very, very exciting talent. So maybe one of the, like I say, along with Madjed, maybe one of the best on this list. And I'm excited to see where he goes next. Someone who wouldn't be out of place in Liga, in my opinion. I could see him moving to Liga, definitely, and having an impact.
Yeah, I mean, he did pretty well last season, really, in fairness to him. Plenty of goals, plenty of assists in just 19 appearances. He killed the Swedish Cup heading into this year. It looked like, he started strong. It's a shame this injury has come about when it has. I think there was a similar player on my list, wasn't there? Nino Zuge, who he's out till June or end of May. And it might be similar here with Sadiq. But when he does come back, you expect him to hit the ground running and maybe even potentially a summer transfer out if he really keeps it up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Gothenburg next week, and unfortunately, I won't be able to see him play because I think he's going to be still injured. But yeah, I'd be surprised if I was to go back in August or something. I'd be surprised if he's in the league. To be honest, I think he'll be a summer transfer, barring injury. He needs to get back obviously fit, but I think it's the one thing about Häcken that I think I said in the preseason show. One of the reasons I had them where I have them in the league is that I worry about some of their key men, how long they'll keep them. And Sadiq is a key man. I'm concerned if they'll be able to hold on to. But they've shown without him they can win games still. But he is very important to them, I think, as a player. So, I really expect there to be movement on a potential transfer within the next few months. Latest end of the season, Steve, I think that MLS clubs as well, once they sort of get their eyes on a player, they've got the money and the funds to take a chance. So if it's not going to be someone at Liga, it wouldn't surprise me if someone like in MLS or the Dutch League or someone like that takes a chance on him. My advice to any scouts watching this would be, take a punt, because I think he's got ability to kick on. A very exciting talent, as I say, bustling player, and someone I enjoy watching.
Ghanaian, do you think they need to be getting him in as a senior cap sooner rather than later?
I think he will eventually get a cap. I mean, I can't comment on the situation of Ghana in terms of the forward options they have. There's a lot of talent in Ghana, of course. In the short answer, I think he's got the ability to eventually get a cap, but I don't know where he ranks on.
Chris Hughton, isn't it, these days?
Can't be too much worse than Jordan Ayew, surely.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. When I'm looking at that, I'm wondering if he's if there's like a dual nationality thing at stake or something like that, because I'm surprised at this, that he's not at least been in, made some sort of friendly appearance for them. He's been involved at under 20 level before, so one to watch out for sure. Ibrahim Sadiq. We're going to move to Otto Rosengren now, a midfielder from Mjällby. I don't think we've ever had a Mjällby player on the 10 to watch list that I can recall anyway, so I was really surprised to see someone from this club involved here. But another centre midfielder. You really do love them, Jonathan, that's for sure. There's some good some good players to watch from this area of the park in Allsvenskan this season. I'm intrigued here about a player from Mjällby.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have any goal. There's not as many, I don't think, top young defenders in the league this season compared to previous seasons. I don't think there's, Bangsbo's on the list, of course, but I don't think there's as many as past seasons, and I don't think there's as many goalkeepers who are young. So, unfortunately, I don't have any goalkeepers on my list, which is a bit of a shame, to be honest, because I could have had maybe Benediktsson at IFK Göteborg. I quite like what I've seen of some bits of him, but he also has shown a little bit of a tendency at times to make a mistake here and there. Maybe a bit of a Meslier light, but I do like Benediktsson. I think he's a good talent. And there's one or two other keepers, but yeah, you've seen my tendency here for midfielders, and I can't leave out Otto Rosengren because it's another one where in a year's time, I'd imagine he would be looking at a move out of Sweden and a big transfer somewhere. And we can probably replay this podcast if you watch it in a year's time or whatever, and he's moved, and you can say, well, yeah, nice. But yeah, Rosengren is someone, and of course it's nice to have a player from Mjällby as well, because they've been so good this season. They're in this Swedish Cup final and have had a really good few years. So yeah, he is a young midfielder, as mentioned, who I think that he's been injured at the early part of this season, so he's not had many minutes. I could equally have gone for Noah Persson at Mjällby, Steve, but he's already got a big move. He's moved to Young Boys Bern for $1 million, and he's been loaned back to Mjällby for the season. He's a wide player who I quite like as well. Can play as a sort of wing back or as a wide forward. But the thing with Rosengren is I just think that I think there's quite a high ceiling there, and I like him because, again, he's quite creative. He's got a decent number of appearances in Allsvenskan level. The games he's played, I think he does add something to their midfield. He is rugged. He is someone who has a lot of people watching him as well. Manchester United, I think, have been again reported to be watching him quite closely. And I think it won't be long before he gets a move. And as someone who's a bit younger, Rosengren, I think he started the season as a 19-year-old. I think he's only maybe just turned. I think he'll be turning 20 soon. Sorry, but as a teenage midfielder, again at that level, it's quite rare that you get someone playing to that sort of high level. I could see him also maybe getting a move to a bigger Swedish club, potentially maybe a Malmo or someone like that eventually.
Yeah, I mean, this is someone who, as an 18-year-old, played effectively a whole season as a starter at an Allsvenskan team, which is, I mean, it takes some doing. I know it's Mjällby, but Mjällby were not exactly a bad team last year or anything like that. So it always catches my eye when someone this young plays so many minutes, no matter where they are in the world. because I think it always shows, especially even in this position, that their mentality of maturity must be somewhat there, because the younger Mavericks and stuff, managers don't trust them as much in terms of minutes. But to get 1,772 minutes in the Allsvenskan last year probably means there's an older head on young shoulders. I don't really know this player, but would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I definitely would, Steve. I mean, we've had Anders Torstensson, our good friend, on the show, of course, for the Mjällby manager, head coach, and he's not someone who's going to mess around with players who aren't serious or aren't solid. Especially at that young age. You need to be disciplined to be able to play for, I think, Anders Torstensson and also the previous manager as well. I think you need to be solid to play at Mjällby. They're a team that is quite, sometimes I've called them maybe the Burnley of Sweden, or someone like that, just quite solid and defense first, really robust defensively. And if you're a midfielder in that sort of system, Steve, you can't really survive if you're not sort of strong as a player. Not necessarily strong, not only strong physically, but also strong in terms of your ability to keep the ball and your ability to sort of resist the pressure for a team that might not have huge amounts of possession, if that makes sense. He's got a shock of blonde hair. He's very kind of notable on the field. He can make sort of those late bursts into the box. He's played for Sweden's under-21 team, scored 1 goal, I think, against Azerbaijan. And he is someone who can sort of arrive late in the box. And it was also someone can sort of get an assist. Can sometimes take set pieces, not always, but he does at times. And as you say, they're just the number of minutes he's played, Steve. Like, that's, as you say, at any level of the game, if you're pulling out that kind of that number of minutes, it means you're relied upon. He can break up play as well. I think he's someone in the final third he can make an impact. And I feel like he has a lot of potential. So yeah, he's also not too bad in the tackle. He can put himself about a bit if he needs to. So yeah, that's my reasoning for choosing him, really.
Very, very good reasoning indeed. Otto Rosengren from Mjällby. We've got 2 players left to talk about. We are going back to Kalmar. Kalmar doing very well on this 10 to watch list this year. And we're going with Mileta Rajkovic, or is it Rajovic? I'm terrible with Balkan-like surnames, Jonathan. But attacker from Kalmar, a new player into the league this season who is already catching your eye and on this list.
Yeah, he's already got 3 goals in Allsvenskan. And I highlighted him in pre-season on the pre-season show, and I said that Kalmar finally have a striker, because I think they've lacked a top striker since Nils Froling left to Hansa Rostock. And Froling was a little bit different, actually. He's someone who could play a bit more wide forward. This Mileta Rajkovic is literally just a big lump kind of up front, and I really like him as a target man. I think he is going to be a massive player for them, and he comes with a great scoring record in Denmark. He signed for Næstved. I think they discovered, if I'm right in saying, they discovered him in a friendly. Kalmar sporting director Jørgen Pettersen said that they found him in a training match when they played against his former club. He said, when we met Næstved in a training match in 2022, early 2022, he impressed me greatly with 2 class goals. During the year, we continued to follow his performances. Both myself, Petter Svard, and Jens Nielsen have been there on various occasions to see him live. And he's obviously done the business because they've paid a decent amount of money to sign him. He's scored 9 goals in 15 games in the Danish second tier. IFK Göteborg were rumoured to want him, and they could really do with him because Marcus Berg obviously is getting on in years, but they didn't do it, and Kalmar did. And he's formerly Brøndby youth player, 4 games, 5 goals in the Swedish Cup. And yeah, I really like this player, Steve.
Yeah, I've noticed he's one of the most popular pickups in the fantasy game this season because of his cheap price as a striker. I think he's one of the most owned players up front. But I mean, this fella can score goals. He's a big lad, actually, nearly 1.9 meters tall. So what type of profile of striker would you say he is overall? Target man, or has he got a bit more technique about him?
I think his technique is in the box. He's a tank, basically. I mean, he's, like you said, 189 centimeters tall forward. He's a tank, basically, in my opinion. And that's what one Swedish website described him as. He is tall. He's strong in the box. He's got good movement. He scored 2 in the most recent game before we recorded this against Halmstad. I already had him as a borderline option for my 10 to watch. So the start to the season just convinced me, really. He was really good in the Halmstad game. Clinical striker's instinct in the box. He can play on the last line. He can play with his back to goal. There was 1 or 2 chances in the match where I felt that other people actually took chances off him. And they snatched it. Whereas I feel that he's quite calm. There's an example of kind of I'm trying to the back to goal sort of play he offers reminds me of what kind of Wout Weghorst. There's a game against Sevilla which it went kind of viral, isn't it? The chance that Weghorst had where he had his back to goal and he chose to pass it to a left back instead of sort of turn and shoot. Rajovic to me seems like someone who can really operate with the back to goal, turn and score. And that's the kind of player he is. His first goal against Halmstad, he kind of got ahead of the defender and put his body on the line, and that's what he offers. He's also a confident player, and I've said already, Steve, I like confident players. He said that he wants to win Allsvenskan's Golden Boot. That was before the season even began, and it's his first year in Sweden. So players like that always, if you've got a bit about you in terms of chat, then I'll always lean towards you. And he's already proving it because he is one of the top scorers already after 3-4 games. So he excites me. I think he could take Kalmar to a new level because they've lacked that kind of clinical striker. They play with a sort of false 9 at times with Oliver Berg last season. This time they're going a bit more direct, and I think that is going to suit their game and maybe evolve them a little bit. So yeah, I really like this player.
You do like a bit of banter, don't you, from a player who says almost outlandish things sometimes, but especially when they back them up, they're right in your good books, aren't they?
Listen, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with confidence as long as you can back it up. It's when you talk and you can't back it up. That's when I'll have a bit of an issue. But listen, I like confident players because it takes a certain level of character to be able to talk about yourself in that way. Because if you can't back up your chat, you're going to look stupid. So. We've got Larsson on the list who obviously has had a bit of things to say, and he's backed it up. 50 games, and Rajovic is a similar one. Why not come in and say you want to win the Golden Boot? Just make sure you can do it, and he's doing it at the moment. So, I think he looks like a real player.
Yeah, I remember that Weghorst chance now, and I remember Paul Scholes after the game in the analysis saying, "I know some forwards who just back heel it in." Do you reckon Rajovic is the sort of guy who would have the confidence to maybe try something not even audacious, really? It was almost a percentage move. But he's not going to be passing it on for someone, is he? He wants to score goals. And I've watched him. The only game I watched him actually myself was against Malmo week 1. He actually had a massive late chance to equalise, and he snatched at it, but he got in a really good position. And to be honest, when I saw that miss, I was like, well, maybe there's a bit more, maybe he's more hot air than anything else, but he's backed it up since then and scored plenty of goals. So fair play to him.
Well, if you watch his goal against Halmstad's second goal, he receives it with his left foot. He receives it one touch in the box, kind of nearly back to goal, turns and just absolutely batters it into the net. His second goal against Halmstad is just superb. Proper wallop, Van Persie style almost, with his left foot. And that's what I say about the contrast with Weghorst. Weghorst, listen, I don't want to get on his back too much. This isn't about English football, but the point is that someone at that level should maybe be able to sort of receive with a back to goal and score those kind of chances rather than laying it off, and especially laying it off, make decreasing the percentage chance of scoring essentially. Whereas Rajovic, again, it's a much lower level. So don't get me wrong, Sevilla is a much higher level than Halmstad, but he definitely has a bit about him in terms of box presence. Good player.
One to watch out for this season, Mileta Rajkovic at Kalmar. The final player on the list. Now, if you had said to me at the end of last year that this player would be on the Allsvenskan 10 to watch list for 2023, I'd have said, well, whatever you're smoking, I'll have a piece of it, because this player was actually in Eliteserien at the back end of last season on loan at HamKam, and it's Victor Lind. Now, I personally never saw anything myself. There was a lot of talk about him there, that he was going to, do really well on that loan spell. I watched him and he looked nothing remarkable. But things can change in a very short space of time. Also, my own assessment has been known to be wrong. So Victor Lind is now on loan at IFK Norrköping from Midtjylland. And he is included on this 10 to watch list for us. Allsvenskan 2023. Take it away.
There's 5 players on the reserve list here. And I'm just looking through the ones that I eventually dropped because Lind was a late entry. And it's literally based on performances at the start of the season, to be honest. So he wouldn't have been anywhere there 10 to watch if this had been recorded a month ago, Steve. I'll be totally honest. But he has shown me in the first few games of the season that there's a little bit there about him. And that is why he makes the list now. I'll give a few away that I was going to have. So unlucky to Edwin Kurtulus at Hammarby. He got cut in the end. He is a centre back, of course. So maybe I could have had him for balance. The one that I would have definitely had on the list, Steve, who was also at Norrköping. He was a certainty for the list, but once obviously Norrköping started the season, I've swapped it, and that's Emil Roback. Now he's at AC Milan. He's on loan at Norrköping. He would have been the one on my list, but Roback's not been in the team, and this man is keeping him out of the team, and that's led to the sort of late switch. I also had Yusuf Arabi potentially at Hammarby. He also got substituted out in the end because I've not seen quite enough of him in this first few games to really convince me. So, Lind's in. Let's see how he gets on. I didn't know about his form there. But when I watch this player, Steve, in the first few games of the season, there's one player in my mind that springs to mind, and that is Dejan Kulusevski. As soon as I watched him, I thought this is a Dejan Kulusevski clone. A wide forward who can kind of play in those pockets, those half spaces on the right-hand side, get sort of, that intricate little pocket there between the right back and the centre back where you kind of you cut inside and then you go through that positioning and then you make those crosses, if you know what I mean, a bit like De Bruyne sometimes does. But Kulusevski is very good at that. He's very good at those sort of little pockets of space in the half space on the right side. And Lind did that against AIK anyway. AIK got absolutely battered by Norrköping at the start of the season, 3-0 at home, and Lind really stood out for me in that match in particular. He's already got one goal. He could have had a goal in that game, I think, but I think he missed the chance. Norrköping have looked okay this season so far from an attacking point of view. Could easily have put if this show was kind of pick the best player for every team, Steve, then I would have had Arne Sigurdsson, obviously. That would have been the obvious choice. But you're not paying your Patreon fee. You're not on this podcast to get the obvious choice. Sigurdsson's already had a big move to CSKA Moscow. £3.6 million in 2018, 5 years ago. He's already played in the Champions League against Real Madrid, Steve. So I think if it would have felt like cheating to us, and it's obviously only on loan because of the situation in Russia, so it would have been cheating to have Sigurdsson, even if he is the better player. But Lind just showed me a little bit in that game and in the games I've seen so far to give me some, just put him in there, see where it goes. It might be years' time, I might be wrong, but listen, scouting is also often sometimes just about your gut instinct, and I'm going on my gut instinct with him.
Well, I was actually looking at some stats, and he's right up there in terms of the XG and expected assist metrics so far this season. He hasn't actually had that many so far, but he's trending upwards to statistically. Now, at HamKam on loan last year, he played as a striker, as a number 9. So that might well be this change of position now suits him a lot better. It was quite clear to me he's not a natural 9. So this can happen and players can improve, and of course in a different surroundings and stuff. And I like a bit of a gut feel to finish off this 10 to watch with, Jonathan. It's interesting he's on loan, and sometimes these loan players can just end up going back to their club and then get sold big. And that could happen. Midtjylland might never hardly get much more out of him. So Allsvenskan is not a bad place for someone like this to shine over the course of a season.
Yeah, I think he will get chances. Like you say, he's a Danish under-21 international, so he's someone who's still got a lot of room to develop and grow. He certainly can't write him off just on some minutes for HamKam or whatever, in my opinion, is someone that young. And going abroad and playing in different countries obviously will help his development, and he's going to have to get out of his comfort zone and adapt to a new environment under Riddersholm, who obviously must know him from Midtjylland because he's Riddersholm, the manager of Norrköping, as a former Midtjylland head coach. So maybe he's seen him at youth level and sort of just taken a punt. We'll see how much game time he gets, because I think it'll be a bit of a shame if, say, for example, Roback suddenly starts getting loads of game time and does amazingly well. But that's the risk you take at times. He's not started the season. Like I say, if this was recorded a month ago, Emil Roback would be in the team. But he's already had his big move to AC Milan, as I say, 1.5 million euros. Lint is someone where, really, Steve, I mean, the best, I'd say among the top 3 left backs in the Allsvenskan is Eric Otieno. And Lint played him like a fiddle in that game. He absolutely ran rings around him. And not just in terms of like 1v1s, but positioning. They could not handle his runs and how his ability to get into little pockets behind the centre midfielder and then away from the left back. And Otieno couldn't handle him eventually. I think he was even subbed in that game, Otieno, which summed it all up. He outfoxed him. So yeah, like I say, he reminds me a lot of Kulusevski in his positions he takes up. Probably can play as a striker as well if he needs to. Maybe Niemann is the main man there, but you never know. He might get some game time more as a forward. Like I say, it's just a gut instinct. Victor Lint. So I don't know his natural ceiling where he could go. I'm not saying he's going to get some big move. He's one of the players. I've talked to 2 or 3 names here where I'm confident they'll get a massive move. I'm not quite sure where it goes with Lint, but sometimes you just have to have a little bit of a gut feeling, and I'll be watching him quite closely this season. He's someone I'm interested to keep an eye on.
That concludes the 10 to watch list for Sweden Allsvenskan. Just a few closing comments before we finish. Now we've done the 2 shows, 10 to watch for you patrons, exclusive on Patreon. Do you know, it's incredible. Just one centre back in 20 players, just one goalkeeper in 20 players, just two fullbacks / wing backs in 20 players. And is that kind of a sign of where things are, perhaps, in the talent, in the young talent that wants to watch, perhaps are more in that type of area now? There's a hell of a lot of what we're going to call them wide forwards on both of our lists these days, Jonathan. It could just be coincidence, one of those years. What do you think? Is it a sign of the times?
Yeah, I mean, who will know if it's our natural biases or a sign of the times. I mean, I know for a fact if you could have, you'd have had more than one goalkeeper, that's for sure. On that list of 20 or 20 total. I know I have a bias probably to centre midfielders. I've got 3 here at least who are quite similar in profile. So I think that there isn't really. I'm trying to think, Steve, to be honest, like top left backs on. That I could have. Who have I missed out here? I'm trying to sort of think, and I can't really think of too many, to be honest.
I was really struggling for centre backs. I mean, I didn't have one on my list. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't good ones out there, but just in terms of the profile we're after, sort of on a 10 to watch list, either being like a really young talent or someone that can massively break through, just wasn't quite there at this. I felt at this stage in time. There's always a few that you can look at, but yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned obviously Noah Persson. I could have easily had he's a left wing back, but he's already got his big move, so I kind of felt like why include him? Could easily maybe for balance have put him in there, maybe ahead of Rosengren. As someone who's a left-sided player. There's a few new signings, Steve, in the league as well that kind of I feel like maybe in a year's time they could come onto the list. I guess the fact that we've done it into the season, has that changed things a little bit? Because I think I would have maybe had. There was definitely some other players I would have had on this list if the season hadn't started. Nathaniel Ajay is someone at Hammarby. He's a young centre back that I could easily have put on the list, but I've got too many Hammarby players, for example, so he's fallen out of it just because of the fact that I think Madjed is ahead of him, and I have to have Madjed in there. So that's a centre back where could easily have gone in. Kurtulus, as I said, I like Kurtulus. A bit old. He would have been a bit old for me, but he could easily be one that you put in, and I think Kurtulus might get a move in a year or so's time. So I feel like it's just maybe a natural thing. Sometimes it's just there's too many good players at one club for it, and that's really affected it. And sometimes it's also a case of maybe there's not enough talent. I don't think there's a sort of outstanding fullback right now that jumps to me. Whereas in past years, Steve, I have had biases. I've trended younger in previous years, and some of them haven't broken through. Last year, Steve had 2 centre backs. Neither of them played hardly any minutes. I had Edvin Tellgren at Norrköping, 17-year-old, Kasper Widell at Helsingborg. Both of them are top prospects, but neither of them got much game time, really. Widell played quite a bit, but, in a relegated team. So sometimes that's just the way it is. Last season, you've got two midfielders there. Our man Romeo can play centre back if needed as well. So that's three centre backs last year. But
times change sometimes, year on year, different times.
Yeah.
But, well, we thank you very much for your assessment of the players. Some great in-depth explanations of your 10 to watch, and we thank you for supporting us on Patreon, everyone. Really hope you enjoyed the content of the most recent 10 to watches. And as I say, we appreciate you an awful lot. And do leave us a comment, likes, things like that. Give us more feedback from this sort of thing if you so desire. But that will do from me. I don't know if you got any closing thoughts, Jonathan.
Nope, that's good. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Twitter at Nordic Footpod if you want to tweet us. Do let us know your thoughts. Obviously, if you're working in football, I'd love to connect with anyone who maybe is a scout or wants to get a bit more lowdown on players. You're always welcome to contact me. Twitter at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL.
Brilliant. Well, take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.